So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to this first session of our workshop on macro and monetary policy. One thing that is important to understand is that the theory that we teach is pure deception and fraud. It is actually meant to deceive students into being busy with mathematics and not understanding the real world, so that the capitalists and corporations can rob the globe blind. So that's why it's most important to understand the nature of reality. Now, if you want to understand financial architecture, modern, then you have to look at the history. What happened? How did the gold standard emerge? How did it break down following World War I? How the attempts were made to restore it, why they failed, what led to the Bretton Woods, what happened in Bretton Woods Agreement, how did the Bretton Woods Agreement fail, and what has happened in the world real. If you don't know these things, then you know nothing about macro. Now, unfortunately, you can take advanced courses in macro and learn nothing about these. You can learn differential equations, but they will teach you nothing about what is happening in the world today. So, basically, actually keeping doing differential equations and Romer style DSG models, these are just distractions. They prevent you from understanding what's going on. So today I will go over the history. I was planning to go over the paper which I mentioned, but and as I was preparing the lecture, I found that there was too much history to go into, so I won't be able to actually get to the lessons in that paper. Maybe that will be later, so somebody else can also do it. So today we're just going to go over history of what is the financial architecture. I won't even get to that. I will get to the Bretton Woods system and later. So basically the problem is that we are facing today is that 60 people have half of the planetary wealth. So how did this happen? I mean, what are the causes? Can you understand this by calculating solutions to differential equations? Of course not. So how is it that today the US dollar is at the reserve currency, which means that they can print trillions of dollars without inflation? When this happened recently, after the global financial crisis, the so-called quantitative easing programs, the US actually printed trillions of dollars, and many economists are on the record as stating that they were very surprised because it had no inflationary impact, contrary to what the theories teach. So why did that happen? That's actually in violation of economic theory. Then the reality today is that the US can print paper and buy anything. It can buy governments, it can buy oil, and they have nothing to do. They just print paper and they have no costs. According to the economic theory, if you print paper, then you suffer a cost because your prices rise. But this doesn't happen. That's because the USA dollar is a reserve currency. Other countries cannot do that. So today we have severe problems in Greece. That's just an example because it's much in the headlines, but there are many other problems. Pakistan is facing similar problems at a lower level. So why did the European Monetary Union happen, and who benefits and who loses from it? Actually, Greece is one of the losers and Germany is one of the winners. But why did it happen? So these are the big problems. What is happening as China emerges and the renminbi becomes a more important currency? None of this can be understood by calculating solutions to differential equations. To understand what's happening, you have to look at the history. And this is very important to understand this history, because unless we understand this, we cannot take defensive measures. Today, Pakistan, and not just Pakistan, all of the countries are under financial attack. And unless you understand the nature of the financial architecture, you cannot understand the nature of the attack that is taking place, and you cannot understand the measures that are needed to take countermeasures. There is this famous story of the heron, the deer that was blind in one eye, so it always tried to keep its one eye towards the hunter, but one day the hunter came from the wrong side and it could not see what happened. So this is the thing that so the major problem in understanding is that not just that you get taught nothing about these, but that you get actually taught falsehoods. So these falsehoods actually create an obstacle to understanding what's the reality. So you can say, and there is lots of evidence for this, that this is actually a deliberate deception. That is the 60 people who have half the wealth, they don't want you to know the mechanism which leads, and they have the money to buy up the textbooks and to endow professorships and to make sure that their point of view is being taught, and to make sure that the heterodox economists who have some idea, they never get a chance to teach a course in the mainstream universities, and they are marginalized completely. Even though their theories make a lot of sense, they don't get a hearing because the big money doesn't want them to be heard. So the very first myth that we have been taught to believe, and even people at State Bank keep repeating this, even though they see every day its failure. This is how strong the power of lies is, that money is neutral. Everywhere and anywhere, inflation is purely a monetary phenomenon. This is completely ridiculous. And if you believe this, then you have lost already, because it's impossible to understand reality if you think that money is neutral. Because money is what makes the world go around, as they say. Everything and everywhere, every phenomena, real or otherwise, is a monetary phenomena. That's the reality. So if you don't understand the role of money, if you think that money is a veil, then that is a veil over your eyes which will prevent you from seeing the reality. So Keynes said and realized this, and we have to think about how amazing the power of theory, ideology is, that what Keynes said has been completely neglected. Even though Keynes is a very powerful and important economist, and at least his message should be understood and realized. It's not easy to, and if some Karl Marx is saying this, you can say, oh, he's a communist nut, we don't have to listen to what he says. Or if Asad Zaman is saying this, oh, he's just a minor eccentric figure, and we don't have to listen to. But Keynes, he said that money is not neutral in the short run and the long run in his book in the start. So why? Well, it's very simple. Yani, there are many reasons, but what Keynes said was that the negotiation for labor contracts is in nominal wages, it's not in real wages. And he gave many reasons, very strong empirical reasons for this. He said that, look, if it was in real wages, then the response to a cut in nominal wage and a response to a rise in the price level should be the same. But it is not. In his experience, the coal and mining industry said that we are in recession and we are going to have to cut nominal wages, and there was a general strike against this. But if the price level rose by the same amount, there was no general strike. So it's obvious that the laborers respond to nominal wages, and that was just one example. If you think about your experience, you can think of thousands of examples and explanations why. So the basic idea that price is equal to the real wage is equal to the marginal disability, this is easy to prove false, because nominal wages are continuously fluctuating every day. You see people get a raise, but the raise, everybody gets the same raise in the sense that you get one increment. So if all people having exactly the same marginal disutility of labor? Of course not. And similarly, so there are so many other things. The labor contracts are fixed over time. The structure of the contract, the number of hours, the nominal wage, this is also fixed in the contract. There is no possibility. All the naib qasids are getting exact naib qasid because there is no skill level difference. So they are getting exactly the same contract. Different people, we are not giving them some less hours and some more hours according to their differences in marginal disutility of labor. So this theory is pure four-letter word. But despite the fact that Keynes said this years ago, and there is massive amounts of empirical evidence which rejects this theory, current textbooks taught in Harvard are teaching exactly the same wrong theory which was rejected by Keynes 70 years ago. So I have a lecture in one of my courses about how 70 years of economists' failure to understand the labor market. More recently, Card and Kruger showed that the increase in minimum wage in some states led to an increase in employment, and they gave an explanation of why this was so. So instead of their finding being taken on board and used, they were rejected. I mean, these are very normal, conventional economists. They have no connection to heterodoxy. They just did an empirical study and they found this. So they write that we were treated as traitors to economic cause, and our friends, we lost years of friendship because of this. So this just shows that this is an ideology. It's you believe in this regardless of any data or empirical evidence. So why is this a strong ideology? Well, because this is one part of what is needed to ensure neutrality of money. If the contract labor wages and nominal wages, then the amount of money will make a difference because it will not be real. It will be nominal wage. So that's just one small reason why money is not neutral. Now, as is Keynesian theory says, if money makes the amount of level of money makes a difference to the real economy, in the sense that if you have too much, it will cause inflation. If you have too little, it will cause an output gap. Then if you have an output gap, this will mean that your investment level is low. So this has a permanent income impact on the growth trajectory of the economy. So it's very important to keep the economy at full employment levels. If you don't do so, you will cause a long-run damage to the economic growth path. And inflation, similarly, if you have high inflation, this causes all sorts of other, contrary to, again, what economic theory teaches about how inflation doesn't matter because prices, it is not true. Inflation makes a big difference. Inflation can cause many kinds of distortions and disturbances. So having high levels of inflation is damaging to the economy. So controlling the level of money is very important. So even though actually the true theory of economics is not difficult, it is, but there are very strong efforts made to conceal the true theory and to deceive people, and that is what makes life difficult. Keynes was ridiculed and rejected in the past. Keynes, we used to, Lucas says that when people talk about Keynes, we laugh because it's so wrong. Current texts teach the same invalid theories. After the global financial crisis, the most important theory, which is Minsky is a follower of Keynes, he has advanced the Keynesian theory. This is the most relevant to understanding what happened in the global financial crisis. So one would think that after the global financial crisis, people would start studying Keynes, and somebody did an examination that has the syllabus being taught at the top 20 universities or at the top 50 universities, has it changed? Has people put more readings about Minsky, Keynes and other important economists who have something to say about the global financial crisis. So no, nothing has happened. The current syllabus has not been adjusted to give people more exposure to these unorthodox theories. The same failed models which were blamed for the GFC, they continue to be used. The DSGE was, Solo gave testimony in Congress that why, Congress asked, why did the economist fail to foresee? So Solo said, well, DSGE model is intrinsically designed to make it impossible for a crisis to occur because everybody is rational. There's only one person, so it can't be that one party is deceiving the other party, which is what happened. The financiers were deceiving the people who were taking mortgages. They knew that the mortgage was going to collapse, but they gave them the loans anyway because they knew that they would be protected from the outcome, and the other guy would lose all his money, but that was not their concern. So these models continue to be used at central banks. Our central bank is also using a DSGE model. ArchGarch, which is the main model for forecasting volatility, which failed completely in the global finance. This continues to be used for forecasting, and people say that it works well in normal times. Now, the thing is that, and that's the explanation, the thing is that models are only useful in abnormal times. This is what the famous Black Swan person, Nicholas Nassim Taleb, says, that it is this, in normal times it doesn't matter if you make wrong forecasts. But what happens is that this one black swan, this one unexpected event, will wipe out years of saving. He calculated that there was the savings and loan crisis which took place in the 1970s or 80s in the US, right after Reagan and Thatcher. Reagan deregulated the savings and loans industry. And after that, in a year or two, the whole industry collapsed because they started making wild loans, and they made loans to Mexico, which caused, and these all collapsed. And so there was a multi-billion-dollar bailout, and he calculated that the past 60 years, ever since the ever since the Great Depression, all of the profits made by the entire banking sector were wiped out in this one event. So it doesn't matter if you make the forecast correctly over the 60 years that the system is not unstable. Just one mistake and everything is gone. So this idea that our forecasts work well in normal times, this is ridiculous, and it's not true that you cannot forecast. This is one of the biggest excuse that the economists who were told that look, your models didn't forecast. They said no, nobody can forecast. These events are like a tsunami. It just happens and nobody can forecast them. So we are not to blame. This is when the Queen of England went to the London School of Economics to ask why did no one see this coming. So that's what they said, that no one can see it. But this is not true. Many people did predict, and there are many models which can predict these financial crises. But because we want to deceive people about the nature of the economic system, so if this truth is not known, and economists are the most brainwashed people in the planet, they are unable to see what other people can see clearly. So there are so many, the neutrality of money is just one myth which we teach in macroeconomics. There are so many things. There is the loanable funds fallacy, which says that banks have money and then they collect money from people and then they loan it to others. This is wrong. Banks are financial intermediaries. Actually, banks create the money that they loan. The myth that government is in control of the money supply, and by at the state bank policy we can decide how much money there will be in the economy. Now, this is again wrong. Then government is not in control because the private sector credit creation is a very significant component of money. Then there's this neutrality of money, which we've already mentioned. This has been led to such a strange situation that even at the State Bank Monetary Policy Committee decisions, we don't even look at the quantity of money, because continuum doesn't matter. So we just look at the interest rate, even though the quantity of money is a very important determinant of the economy. But the models that we are using, they don't mention money. They don't have the real the RBC models don't have any discussion of money. So basically, that's why it's very important to learn real world macro, because the deceptions are extremely many. Joan Robinson said that we should learn economics to avoid being deceived by economists. Keynes said that learning this, creating this new theory was not the problem. It's very simple. The problem was to get rid of my mind of all of the misconceptions created by classical theory. He states that in his introduction, that the biggest problem was the economic theories. Ariel Rubinstein, very famous game theorist, he says that if you look at textbooks of game theory, they start by saying that game theory has so many applications here, there, everywhere. But in 40 years, I have not come across a single real world application of game theory which is valid. So I, in some of one of my blogs, there was some debate about my extreme critique. They said, you are a mullah, that's why you reject all Western economic theory. So that's not, doesn't have to do with reality. I said, okay, just find me one economic theory which helps us understand the real world better than common sense. And nobody could answer this question. Fine, then I said, okay, you can't find any economic theory, find me one regression model which helps us to understand the real world. And there was no answer to that. But the illusion, the Western dominance is so strong that it's hard for us to believe that they can make any mistake. So whenever they say something, we say, Aman Nasanatna. Western knowledge ki buth ke samne sabne sajda kiya hua hai. So the truth is not difficult to find, but unlearning the falsehoods that we have been taught is difficult. So this is the quote from Keynes: the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas and escaping from the old ones. These are all Keynes quotes. Economists are unmoved by lack of correspondence between their ideas and reality. So this happens quite often. The labor textbook which I examined, Harvard Professor Bojas currently teaches from this. So he looks at the Card-Kruger example. He says it's very strange that these examples are coming out against our our common sense and simple theories. There must be some mistake in the Card-Kruger finding. I don't know. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's that. Anyway, the possibility that my theory is false, this does not yet take into account. Just that there's something wrong with Card-Kruger experiment. So these are all three quotes from Keynes. Economists are like Euclidean geometers in a non-Euclidean world. So the axioms that they have in mind don't match the reality. So they keep rebuking the lines that, why aren't you keeping straight? This doesn't follow our theory. Instead of trying to modify their theories. Paul Romer, who was trained in Chicago by Lucas, he's one of the students, but finally his eyes became opened to reality by the global financial crisis. So he has said that macro has been going backwards for decades. We have lost hard-won knowledge, referring to Keynesian theory, which was thrown out in Chicago. And he says that basically modern macroeconomics is based on the idea that real business cycles occur through imaginary causes, not because money isn't allowed to play a role. So the real shocks to the economy are invisible. So then they just put on some epsilon, and they say, what is this epsilon? Nobody knows what it is. And that's where the driver of business cycles and RBC models. So Paul Romer says that the theory and how they dismiss facts is so amazing that it deserves its own label, and I suggest post-real. So, all right. So this is just because people people have psychological difficulty. Because what I'm saying is really very strong. I'm saying that what they are teaching in Harvard today is like witchcraft. They're teaching how to build potions, and they're teaching completely false theories. Not just Harvard, all over the world, in Qaeda-ism, in Pakistan, Australia, these economics texts are being taught, and what they are just fables and fantasies. So this is a very strange thing. How can sensible people do such strange things? So that's why I've explained that this is not Asad Zaman being an Islamic fanatic and saying everything from the West must be rejected. There are some reasons, and many secular economists have said the same thing. So now we come to some simple basic facts about macro, which are easy to understand. Basically, the simple Keynesian fact. This is subject to a lot of qualifications, but as a first step to understanding the economy, you should understand that money matters. Money, the quantity of money, the exact quantity, is of utmost importance. Exactly opposite of what the quantity theory of money says, which says that the amount of money doesn't matter. Actually, if you think about Keynesian world, then there is an exactly correct quantity of money at which you have full employment and zero inflation. If you have more, then you get inflation, which is harmful to the economy. If you have less, then you get an output gap, which is also harmful to the economy. So keeping the money quantity at exactly the right level is of utmost importance to keeping money. So if you say that money doesn't matter, then you are dead, because the most important. Yes. That's wrong. That's wrong.
मनी को भी फिर अब दूसरी बात है कि जो पहले आपने बात की मनी जो है वो गवर्नमेंट के कंट्रोल में नहीं है, तो इट मींस मनी जो है वो तो कमर्शियल बैंक के कंट्रोल में है. तो सबसे
partly in control of money and partly in private banks. It's not full control. So all of these things are not understood, not taken into account by models, and that's why it's important to understand macro and to create better models. So money is not neutral. Because of these facts, money is not neutral in the short run or on the long run. But the major modern theories which are currently being taught and believed, the real business cycle theory says the opposite thing. The Nairu, which says basically that there is a natural rate of unemployment, this is also wrong, because this level of unemployment is subject to, it's controlled by money, and also Lucas's lot of work by him is also wrong. So basically what I'm saying is that the major theories being taught ignore the simple basic facts about macro. So the truth is not hard to see, and truth is a very powerful agent of change, in the sense that ideas are important. If we teach our students the right theories, they will be able to see through this. The confessions of the economic hitman, the man uses wrong theories to deceive people, and if you don't understand what's going on, you will be deceived. But if you have the truth, you will be able to avoid being deceived. It's not just, the reasons for our wrong policies is not just because IMF and World Bank force us to do the wrong things, which they do, but more that the theories that they use deceive us into thinking that these are good. So most people think that IMF and World Bank are helping us instead of hurting us, which is what they also claim. But this is not true. In order to understand that, you have to have the true macroeconomics instead of the falsehoods that you have been taught in your macro courses and that we are teaching to others. So truth is deliberately concealed by massive propaganda, and economic theories are propaganda, and these economic theories are the biggest obstacle to understanding reality. So how do we undeceive ourselves? Basically, if we study history instead of mathematics, we can easily find the truth. The real reasons, but it is also important to understand that history is just a collection of facts. To understand why these things happen, you have to dig beneath, and this level is not available, is not accessible. So there is some amount of a level of understanding that is required that is not immediately obvious. So there is some difficulty in understanding what goes on, because just the collection of facts will not tell us the reason for those things happening. So the beginning of macro, as I've already mentioned, is to understand money, and that's the finance. Basically, understanding money involves understanding international financial architecture. So the basic Keynesian theory I've already mentioned that you have to have the right amount, but this is too simple a model. It's not just the global amount of money in the economy. It matters in whose hands it is. So the distribution matters a lot. If the money is in the hands of some people, it will have different effect. If it's in the hands of other people, it will have different effects. So this is actually the classical economy as opposed to neoclassical. They divided the economy into various groups. There were laborers, landlords, capitalists, and then they looked at the shares of the economy in the different hands. And this was very important to understand the real economy. And today, because again, as a part of the process of deceiving people about what is going on, they just set their agents. So the fact that whether you are a capitalist or a laborer, this is now no longer part of your economic theory, because if you look at that, then you will be able to see that the laborers are being exploited by the capitalists. So the first illusion of macroeconomics is that money is a veil. So now, one very important consequence which people don't understand is that...
Can I ask this question? So what is the exact level of money in the economy? Is there some formula or some standard design?
For that you have to read Werner, Richard Werner, Quantity Theory of Credit. He shows why the conventional levels of money as calculated by State Bank currently are wrong, and he provides the right definition, but it's a complex theory. So, but one very simple consequence of all of this that we have heard is that gold money is bad. Now, this is a confusion that is very common, that people understand that, okay, this financial system is very evil, it is causing a lot of damage, and it's causing a lot of damage to the poor countries, it's causing a lot of damage to the Islamic countries. So what's the solution? Let's go back to gold. That is the Sunnah. So now it turns out that this is not the solution. I'm talking only as an economist. I mean, the people who are working on this, they're ulama, and they have said that some ulama seen that there is a serious problem with modern economic international financial architecture, and they have suggested as a solution, let's go back to gold. But this is not going to work. Why? Because basically the amount of gold is fixed. This cannot adjust flexibly to the needs of the economy. And that's what we need. As we see, the amount of money has to be controlled at exactly the right level to prevent inflation and to prevent unemployment. And the amount of gold does not vary according to the needs of the economy. So this is not going to be a suitable solution. And you can show historically that countries which were tied to gold, they had either two options. Either you can actually force gold, in which case you get to recessions because you don't have enough money for the needs of the economy, Or the other solution is fractional reserve banking. So this means that you have a little bit of gold and you introduce a lot of money. So this does work, but it has many other problems which we will. This is the current system, that using fractional reserve you can print money and vary the amount of backing it has by gold, and thereby get the money level which you want without being tied to gold, and at the same time on the surface saying that the money is being backed by gold. So this does actually fix the problem, that you can get the right level of money, but there are many other problems. The theoretical solution, which the economists say why it doesn't matter, is that the price level will adjust. And technically and theoretically it is true that if you have an amount of gold and it's too little, you can cause the prices to go, you can make gold more expensive. That means the same amount of gold is actually more money, but this will require deflation. Now in a practice, this doesn't work because of many practical reasons. Yani nominal prices of labor are fixed, and if you make them go down, this causes a large number of serious practical problems. So the theory idea that the price level will adjust to make sure that the money level is in the right amount, it doesn't work in practice for practical reasons. So gold money cannot be made into a functional economic system. So many people are talking about bringing back gold because they know that the current system is very bad. But this is not a solution. But the real solutions are difficult. So Lord Mervyn King, Governor of Bank of England, has written a book, and he has written that of all the many ways of organizing banking, the worst is the one we have today. And he says that change is necessary because this is so bad, but the only thing is whether we can think our way. And this is the real problem, that there is no easy solution. The problem can be fixed, but there are no easy fixes. Furthermore, the natural fixes that we can make are going to be strongly opposed by the people who benefit a lot, like America. America has, in fact, Keynes came with a proposition to Bretton Woods which would have been neutral. The thing that happened at Bretton Woods was that dollar was made into the central currency, which was enormously beneficial to the USA. Keynes' proposition was one which was more equal among all currencies, and it created a system which would have been much more beneficial, but the Keynesian proposition was blocked. Nobody even knows about it, that the equitable way of conducting exchange. See, instead of conducting international trade such that when Pakistan buys oil from Saudi, they have to pay in dollars, this is very strange. It should be possible to do things with reals and rupees, and that was what the Keynesian system did, and what many other systems, but many other proposals have been made, and they have all been systematically blocked by the USA, who benefits from this. So that is also European Monetary Union was created to counterbalance the weight of the dollar. That was one of the reasons. And the Chinese are working on methods to eliminate dollar dependencies because they want the renminbi to be the most powerful currency. And that will benefit them, but not us. We have to think about how we can create a financial architecture which would be equitable at least. But this is not easy. So this is the second thing to understand, that money is artificial. It is an invention. It has not been the same over the 20th century. There have been many different monetary systems. Even currently, different countries have many different types of monetary systems. And these are rules that we make, that this is what the law will be. It's an artificial creation, so it's not something that is, automatically natural part of the environment, like the trees and the mountains and whatever the system is. So we have to think about Now, of course, the first obstacle to thinking about money is the quantity theory, which says that money doesn't matter, so you don't have to think about it. So, once you start thinking about money, then you realize that money is created by law. So it's money is really today. Money is fiat money, comes into existence by government law. It operates in certain ways, and we can change these rules. So we have to think about which rules are good and which rules are bad. And today we don't have the equipment and knowledge necessary to think about money, because the theories we have been taught are all wrong. So the value of money is created by the government by saying that this money is legal tender. Money is a way of quantifying debt. This is David Graeber's book, which is very important to understand the nature of money. So basically, if I owe you something, see what happens in a monetary economy is that I sell you apples or tomatoes. Now, you don't have something to give me which is the equivalent, or which I need. So you give me a note which says that okay, at some later time you can cash it in. Now, in a non-monetary economy, I would say, okay, here's my gift to you, and in return, you should give me something later when you can, when I need. More generally, in a generalized gift economy, which is actually very close to the Islamic method, that I do you a favor and I expect from Allah that He will reimburse me. And if everybody is doing that whenever I don't need something and somebody who is in need comes to me, then I give what I have in excess of my need to the one who needs. In this society, the overall level of precautionary money holdings will be very low. I don't need to keep a lot of money, because when I am in need, I can take it from anybody who has more than what they need. This is a highly efficient system. If you think about the individualistic system, what happens is that, for example, cancer treatment costs, let's say, 5 lakh rupees. And now there are 100 people. Now if everybody is an individual, then everybody has to work hard and save 5 lakhs in case he gets cancer. But cancer occurs very rarely. Only 1 person in 100 gets. So if there is cooperation, then people will say, okay, together everybody should save 1,000 rupees, and then whoever is the one person who needs it, we will all give it to him. So instead of everybody saving 1 lakh rupee as a contingency for cancer, everybody only saves 1,000 rupees, and so they get to work much less, and everybody is protected. So in a cooperative economy, you have very strong positive externalities, and this is what the Islamic economy is like. People don't have lots of wealth and savings because they don't need lots of wealth and savings, because it's Ummat is like one body. If one part feels pains, then all feel pain. But to get to this way of thinking from a market economy is very difficult. And this is actually what the Prophet ﷺ did. And when he came, Islam came as a stranger. People were fighting each other and doing all sorts of harmful things. And then after the effect of the teaching of Islam, the Quran says that these are people who feed others while they are hungry. So they came to care for each other so much that even if you are personally hungry, you have nothing to give your own family, you give to the other person because you put the needs of others first. So this cooperative economy is very different from the competitive economy. So basically, money is a way of converting a social obligation into a financial obligation. So exactly what is money? Money has both legal structure and also a social structure dimension about what all of us believe and think about money. So this creates a dilemma because the deeper truths about money are important, but they are also difficult to understand and teach. We can teach, you see, here is the system, let's this is what the system is. But teaching about why the system is like this and how it can be changed, that requires much more scholarship and much more depth. So the dilemma that we face is that should we treat the cancer or should we treat the symptoms of the cancer? So the standard approach is that, okay, the international financial architecture, this is given, there's nothing we can do about it. So if it's causing problems, let's fix the problems. So this is the standard approach. Now how about going to the root and saying that all of these problems are being caused by the wrong financial architecture, so let's try to change the architecture. Well, that's the source of the problem. Much more difficult to do, much more difficult to understand. So what is needed is that you rethink the system from scratch, create an alternative, better system. To do that, you have to understand what the system is, how it works, because it's an artificial, how it was created, why it was created, who it helps, who it hurts. So this requires much deeper level of understanding. We say, okay, the system is like this, X, Y, and Z. It's causing this problem. Now how can we fix that problem? So that's much easier. That's any tinkering. And this, however, will not get to the source of the problem. But, when the patient is bleeding, then you apply the bandage first and then you worry about the deeper causes. So both things need to be done. So today's lecture is about understanding the historical origins of capitalism, which is very strong. You see, capitalism has also changed over time. So you can say that in the early 20th century, we had, up to the 1970s, we had what we might call industrial capitalism, where capitalism was built on the machines which created the Industrial Revolution. But after the 70s, we have what is financial capitalism. So the process of making money has changed from industrial to financial. So this part of lecture is from the transition from the pre-market economy to the industrial economy. And maybe we will get to the second part if there is enough time. So for this part, we need to understand the historical origins of capitalism, and for this purpose, Polanyi's Great Transformation is very important. I have studied this and given many lectures on this, and so there is this link which provides you with many discussions. In this lecture I will go over this very briefly. So basically, first this happened in England, that there was a transformation from a paternalistic regulated economy to an unregulated market economy. So a paternalistic regulated economy is one in which you have a society, people take care of each other. That's what paternalistic means. If there is somebody in need, then there are people who are responsible for this. So there is social responsibility. Also, markets are not free to do whatever they like. There are many things which are outside the marketplace, and even inside the marketplace you cannot do many things. You cannot exploit people, you cannot take advantage of their needs and so on. So now in England first, for various reasons which are discussed and long and complex, there was a transformation from the PRE to the unregulated market economy. This transformation occurred in multiple dimensions. It changed the ways of thinking and behaving, so from cooperation to competition, from generosity to selfishness. It changed the social structures from the extended family to the atomic family, or the many other changes took place. The aristocrats and landlords were which were the leading class in the USA, they were replaced by the merchants and the industrialists who became more powerful, and political structures changed and economic structures changed, the laws changed to accommodate the new emerging power of the newly emerging social classes. So there were many, many changes, but the history was that the main key was that after Cromwell's revolution, the restoration of the monarchy of the Stuarts gave the aristocrats a chance to make a major land grab, which they hadn't been able to do in the past, although they had many trials. And they said that, okay, we will put you back on the throne on the condition that we get these enclosures, which are massive pieces of land, and that the right to property becomes prior to the possibility of the monarch taking away. So the right to property became sacred. Once a man's home is his castle. So once you have this property, nobody can take it away from you, not even the king. This was the... So now then the aristocrats got massive amounts of land. They dispossessed a lot of labor, people who used to hunt in the forest and fish and cut grass for living. They were unable to keep their living. And this is what created a labor force, because these people had no means to survive except by selling their labor to others for money. And the misery that this caused is recorded in Dickens' novels, for example, and many other, the early industrialist period of England. So this led to increases in productivity. This is what the capitalists keep saying, that yes, it is true that the people were making a subsistence living. Now when you created this enclosures, aristocrats got access to massive amounts of land, and they were able to farm these efficiently, more efficiently than possible. So production was raised. So ultimately, everybody benefited. That's what they say. Of course, if you say that loss of freedom and is not compensated for by more bread, then you might think differently. But anyway, economists say that the only measure of welfare is the goods that you have, and so other psychological dimensions don't count. So once you got surplus food, this led to the possibility of the Industrial Revolution, because you can now keep lots of people engaged in industrial production because there is excess food available, because basically the pre-market economy is a subsistence economy. You only raise the amount of food that you need. So these kinds of changes led to the possibility of massive excess surplus production. So in traditional societies, self-sufficiency is a virtue, and a simple standard of living is best. Ostentatious living, luxury, wasteful consumption, these are considered bad universally. There is a concept of community, that we are all together, although there is inequality. So it's the standard metaphor is that the community is like a body. There is the head, which is superior, there's the feet, which is inferior, but they all work together, they are all useful, they all have their own unique functions, and nobody can take the place of other, and everything is equally honorable. There is social responsibility, we take care of each other. The property that we have is a trust, it is an amana. This is the standard pre-market philosophy about property. You can't use it in any way you like. You have it only for a short while, and then you will pass it on. So you can't destroy it, you cannot deplete the oil to maximize your profits, because this oil you have to use in a sensible way, because it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the future generations. But these ideas were, and of course, consumption is not the purpose of life. We have higher purposes. This was standard thinking in pre-market economies. So, but in post-market economies, then all of these ideas were changed. The main problem that the market society faces is that you have huge amounts of surplus, goods which are above what is needed. So now, what are you going to do with this? Throw it away. Nobody wants it. So, the first barrier to creating a market economy is the traditional society. That's one of the main themes of Polanyi, that the market society comes into being by destroying traditions, not by enriching them or adding them. It's not an evolutionary process that traditionally society gradually becomes modern. It's a revolutionary process where the traditional values are killed in order to create modern values. So you see, if you believe in self-sufficiency, then modern society cannot come into existence. So you have to change this idea. You have to say that no, life is about consuming, and consuming is important, and self-sufficiency is bad. So initially, you see, when you had overproduction, this was used to acquire gold, because the surplus production was not useful. People didn't want it. Nobody outside your country wanted it. Nobody inside your country wanted it. So what could you do? Well, you could sell it for gold, and gold can be used to finance military adventures. And military was useful because then you could go and capture other resources and other countries. So the mercantilist economy, people think that this was a mistaken economic theory. This is wrong. Was the best theory, and the mercantilist system was the best possible system for those who developed it. When surplus production came into being, then the thing that the groups that benefited the most from it was the merchants, and they displaced the aristocrats and the landlords, who were the earlier dominant classes. And also this was good for governments, because if you have surplus production, you can use it to finance armies. It gives you more power. So basically, merchants and governments developed and enforced the mercantilist policies. Merchants benefited from enforced monopolies, bans on foreign competition, and the poverty of workers. These were all pro-merchant policies which were polished, which were part of the mercantilist economic system. And if you look at the mercantilist writers, they were either merchants or they were government officials. These were not the aristocrats or landlords like Adam Smith. So the mercantilist theory was that you should use all your resources for production. Now, and you should create armies, you should conquer people. So the major problem of the mercantilist mindset is that the more you produce, the better. But then you also have to find markets, so you do it by conquest. So that was one of the drivers of the global conquest by the Europe. How do you find markets for this surplus? This Say's law. Supply creates it's a psychological statement. There was this massive anxiety. What are we going to do with all this surplus? Nobody wants it. So basically, Say's law is a psychological reassurance that don't worry, if we have surplus, the demand will automatically be created. It's not an economic theory. It's a psychological law to reassure the new industrial society that don't worry, your surplus production is not going to go to waste. Demanders will come along. So basically, the industrialist overproducing society faces two problems: how to find people who will buy these goods, and how to produce even more. I mean, that's one of their givens, that more production is better. So more we produce more, we get more gold. Basically, that's the idea. So now, if you had in the Europe, Peace of Westphalia occurred in the 17th century. This ended the religious wars and created some amount of peace in Europe. So instead of fighting each other and capturing resources from each other, the Europeans said, oh, the globe is empty, and we are, because of the Industrial Revolution, they were far ahead of other societies in the globe, which were much closer to subsistence level societies. All over the globe, production was not a value. People were doing philosophy, arts, literature. Nobody thought that producing more goods is useful. I mean, you produce goods because this is a necessity. You do what is needed for life, and in fact, you can enjoy luxury and comforts, but that's not the purpose of life. Now, in the market society, achieving luxury and eating at Serena, this becomes the purpose of life. So this is, and this is the necessity, because if you're producing a massive amount of excess, then you have to have people believe that this is useful and important, and this is the purpose. Otherwise, it will all go to waste. People will not buy all of this surplus produce. So, when Europeans acquired the means to live at peace with each other, then they said, okay, let's go and conquer the globe. And so, when they conquered the globe, the object was to find markets for surplus and to find resources for use in production. So, all over the globe, societies were self-sufficient. Nobody wanted goods made in UK. They didn't need it. So, institutional structures all over the world were destroyed. The self-sufficient economies were destroyed. And just like what happened in England first, the poor people did not have access to the means to eat. That created the labor force. So exactly like this, all over the world, economies were destroyed, so they wouldn't be able to eat. That created a labor force that was universal. And then they were taught these ridiculous theories of comparative advantage, so that you have to export raw materials and buy finished products from us. So basically, all societies all over the globe were destroyed. Their political, economics, and religious structures, they were all destroyed and replaced by colonial institutions and colonial ways of thinking. So that's roughly the history in very, very brief form. Now, the problem, if you think about financial architecture, is that you have domestic markets and international markets. And the domestic money exists by fiat, but fiat doesn't work in international markets. International trade requires an artificial mechanism, something or the other. Gold is the simplest mechanism. So, in this period of time that we are describing, when you had international trade, first of all, there were colonial systems. So, in the British Raj, there were the British colonies, and the British pound could circulate, and there was no problem with that. But if Britain was trading with China, they had to use gold. If they were trading with France or other countries, you had to have gold. So, if you fix your currency in terms of gold, then you can do international trade. So that's how the gold system emerged, because of the needs of international trade. The currencies, pounds was fixed in terms of gold, francs, and all the hard currencies were the currencies in the center of the colonizing countries. French, Germany, Spain. These were fixed in gold, and the soft currencies were the ones that were really in India. So we had local currency, but this could not be used for international trade because it was a colonial currency. Now, so the fractional reserve banking system allows the control of domestic money supply. So you could do the Keynesian type policies of adjusting money supply to domestic conditions. And foreign trade you can do in gold. You don't have to have 100% backing. As long as the trade imbalance is minor, you can send gold and you can get gold back. And this is the famous Hume's mechanism, which doesn't work at all, by the way. Hume's mechanism is completely wrong, but it's a it's a reassurance that don't worry about paying with gold for foreign imports. They will be buying from you also. So as long as the trade imbalance is minor, this doesn't cause problems. So the gold standard can be used in this situation where you have a center and you have large colonies and there's not that much international trade going on because all of the trade is self-sufficient within the colonies, but moderate amount of international trade can take place. So this comparative advantage theory was invented as a part of the weapons of colonialization and deindustrialization, because basically they said to India that, and to all other colonies, that your job is to produce raw materials. Don't worry about creating industries, etc. That's our job. So everybody does what you're good at. You're good at producing raw materials. Now, actually, India was a highly industrialized country. If you look at Kennedy's book, Rise and Fall of Great Nations, before colonization, India was producing nearly 20% of the industrial output of the world. So the process of colonialization deindustrialized India. So the idea that, this idea that some countries are good for producing raw materials and others are industrial, this is obviously wrong if you think of it in dynamic context. All industries start. Obviously, if you start an industry, it will be at a disadvantage compared to industries which are in advanced countries. But unless you do that, you will never develop industries. So countries which followed the comparative advantage theory, they never developed industries, while countries which violated this, like Germany, it had this economist called List who said that you have to have infant industry production. They developed industries. Similarly, the East Asian economies, they developed their industries under heavy production, and nearly everywhere where industry has developed, it has developed under heavy production because the UK had a 50-year lead on the other European nations when due to industrial revolution having started first. So it was impossible for any other place to develop industry unless they protected. So if you think of economic theories and how they correspond to your ideology, to your comparative advantage, then you see that free trades were introduced by Adam Smith in 1776 when England had acquired a 50-year lead on the other nations. So at the same time, sometime later, Germany invented the infant industry argument because they needed it. So basically, economic theory is a creature of defense. Is a warfare, is an ideological warfare. And today we need to be aware of this war that is being conducted against the poorer countries of the world. Today, trillions of dollars of tribute goes from the poorest countries in the world to the richest countries. How? Because of the economic theory weapon which is used against them, which we are all led to believe that we are taking loans from foreign countries and getting FDI, and this is very good for us. And this is the major problem. Actually, you see, all theories have an element of truth. It is not that is what makes them dangerous. It's not that there are ways to defend all of these, and FDI does have some advantages, and loans can bring benefits. So you use these advantages and you cover up all the disadvantages. You have to have a realistic picture that some things are good, some things are bad, how to accept the good. Instead, what we do is we go into these blanket global theories that FDI is good, so we run regression FDI. Well, some parts of FDI are good, some parts are bad. You have to differentiate between them, and you have to be discriminating. So free trade was imposed by war on Japan and China. There was a war against China, and the terms of the treaty were that China will be open to Western goods, nothing else. I mean, if this is so strongly in favor of China as we are taught to believe, then why did people need to make war and enforce this by threat? Same thing happened to Japan. There was a multi-country European fleet with US, UK, and maybe it was Holland, I don't remember, 3 or 4 countries sent a fleet against Japan, and they defeated Japan, and there was only one condition of the treaty, that Japan will be open to foreign goods. So this is a great theory that this is actually the standard white man's burden, you know. They did this for the benefit of Japan, like they are going around all the world and doing IMF goes around the whole world and does things for the benefit of the poor countries. So this free trade was imposed on colonies. Some colonies managed to retain a certain amount of sovereignty, independence of thought and action. And those countries which did were able to develop. And those countries which lost their ability to think for themselves, they lost everything. And we are in the later category. We have lost the ability to think for ourselves, and therefore we are suffering from the consequences. The infant industry argument remains valid. That is, if you want to develop industry, you have to protect them. But it is also true, what they say in conflict with this and in contradiction to this, is that if you protect your industries, they will grow fat and inefficient. This is also absolutely true. So what Koreans did was a very clever strategy. They said that, okay, we will protect you, but you have to, in 10 years, you must be able to compete with the foreign industries. If you don't, you will die. So we will. So they protected them by saying, okay, this year you have 100% production, next year you will have 90%, next year you will have 80%. And also they said that, okay, from the first year you have to produce 10% of your products and you have to export them in order to become. So they used a lot of, carrot and stick. Otherwise, it's absolutely true that if we just protect the industries and we think that by protection these industries will become internationally efficient, that's not going to work. So, and many people tried it and failed. And that's how the people argue that, look, protection has been tried and it has failed. This is also true. But that's why I said that all theories have elements of truth, and you have to be, you have to think instead of just believing in slogans. You see, that's the problem. Slogans. Okay, free trade is wonderful, protection is bad. Neither the free trade is good in some situations, it's bad in other situations, and it's very specific. Which country and which time and which good are we talking about? You have to use your brains. You can't use slogans. Unfortunately, economics teaches us slogans, not reality. So, coming to the gold standard, I think that's all that we will be able to go to. So, by the end of the 19th century, there was basically what Polanyi says, there was 100 years of peace in Europe because they were busy with conquering the rest of the world. They didn't have really time to fight each other. So, there was massive amount of trade developed. Commodities were sold here and there. And so world commodity prices were a central reality in the lives of millions of peasants. And so basically, because of the gold standard, it created a very simple, efficient trading mechanism which worked efficiently. And you see, one of the important things about trade is that your shipments and your revenues, they are at different times. So as long as the currency, and you sell your goods in pounds or in francs, and then you receive your payment sometime later, and then you have to convert. So if the gold system is stable, then you can do this very easily. If, as in current system, the prices are fluctuating, then things become very difficult. So the international economic system became central to the lives of people because it functioned very well. So grains were being shipped, and essential items were being shipped across boundaries. So the World War I was caused because basically in the 19th century, high finance had interest in maintaining peace because it was benefiting from all of this international trade. And so many occasions arose in which wars could happen, but the financial power, the Rothschilds and the international, basically multinational banks prevented wars from happening. But there was 2 or 3 things happened which led to the World War I. Three points are mentioned here. First, there was a balance of powers. The balance of power meant that there were multiple powers, and there was an understanding that if any big power attracts a smaller power, all other neutral parties will go to the aid of the smaller power, so that nobody uses his power to swallow up their neighbors, because everyone is threatened. You see, if a big power swallows its smaller neighbor, it will become bigger and it will become able to attack the others. So before it can do so, there was this informal agreement. This is called the balance of powers. If anybody attacks anybody, the weaker power will be supported by all others. So it prevents the stronger party from swallowing up relatively weaker parties. So what happened in the early 20th century was that 2 different alliances take place. One was the Great Britain and Britain, France and Russia versus Germany, Austria and Italy. So these 2 alliances formed, and now this caused the balance of power to break down, because now there are only 2 hostile powers. You need at least 3 powers for a balance of powers to exist. And then basically the globe had been exhausted, so the colonies were finished as a source of expansion, so you could only fight with each other. And all of and these people, they have been fighting for centuries, so this is the only thing they know how to do. So once the scope for global expansion ended, then they started looking at each other to fight. And also all of the countries had huge militaries because they had been using these for colonization, and now these were standing idle because there was no more world to be conquered, and there was relatively peace in the colonies. So they all made very clever plans. France had a plan to destroy Germany. Germany had a plan to destroy France, and Russia had plans, and Britain had plans. So they all had these plans. So they were eager to put them into practice. And all of these plans were very optimistic that we will go to war and in 1 week we will conquer France because we have a very clever plan. So basically then World War I took place, and it didn't go according to anyone's plan, and there was massive war expenses, and gold was used up massively. European economy was destroyed, and so nobody had enough gold to maintain the gold standard. And one of the things that happened was that there was a massive conflict between basically your Keynesian economic principle that after the economy is destroyed, you need to invest heavily in it. How are you going to invest heavily? You don't have any money, so you have to do deficit financing. That's perfectly fine. There's no problem with deficit financing except for the international front. You cannot maintain your parity. So with if you do deficit financing, you're going to end up with trouble on the foreign international trade front. So when you have the gold standard, you can't run high deficits because of in order to protect your goal backing. But and that was fine as long as you had pre World War One. But post World War One, this created a problem. That how do we do gold standard? How do we invest? And once the gold has been depleted, how do we do foreign trade? So these were all problems that emerged, and there was no solution to them. And people kept trying to restore the gold standard and go back to pre-war because there was huge amount of prosperity in the pre-war period, but they couldn't figure it out. And ultimately, there were many attempts that were made to recreate the gold standard. These all failed ultimately, and that led to the Bretton Woods. And I think that's enough for today. So next time I didn't even